Our scripture today comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning with verse 2. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. Come to him, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices, acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, "See, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." To you then who believe, he is precious, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into this marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Last summer, I had the opportunity to go with our youth to the Tri-Cities Work Camp. As we were on that trip last year, my group was responsible for building a ramp, which turned into an interesting experience. Now, in past experiences, mission trips, I have had the opportunity to be on several construction rebuild projects, particularly on the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. So the work wasn't unfamiliar, but still not exactly my strong suit. However, the work at the Tri-Cities Work Camp is geared towards students taking control of the project. And I was quite grateful to be off the hook for a little bit for not being the adult who had to know everything. My group's project was a ramp for a lady who was disabled and currently unable to leave her home because she had no means of egress. Fortunately, because of the way that the sites were lined up, our group had extra access to one of the handymen who really helped give us the direction we needed. I was pleased at how well the students worked together and moved from an inaccessible front porch to building a very sturdy and what I considered well-built ramp. Our handyman had built hundreds of these and was a huge support to the students. So we finished sometime on Thursday around noon, and he inspected the project and was very pleased with the team's work. So we all began to relax a little, thinking, what will we do with the whole day left? And we waited for our final inspector from the work camp to come over. He got there a little later in the afternoon on Thursday and measured various places, walked around, even jumped on top of it in places, gave the kids a whole lot of praise, and walked to the last section and said, that part right there needs to be taken apart, lowered about a ½ inch. I really thought he was joking, and I could tell by the kids' expressions they thought the same thing. But Pete insisted that we take apart the last 2 sections, dig out the dirt underneath it, and lower it by a ½ inch. I admit it was the moment I had to remind myself I was the adult and needed to lead by example and not let my frustration show. I was not at all pleased. We spent Friday morning digging out, lowering that ramp exactly where he wanted it. And truthfully, it did help the lady in her wheelchair be able to get over the last slight ripple that we had left in the original deck. As we were wrapping up the project, a sense of pride came over the team. When Pete came back, jumped on it again, he walked up and down it, and he gave us high praise for the group's work. I told him later how frustrated I was with him for thinking that he was just creating some more busy work for us, but how grateful I was in the end that he had taught us all a lesson about quality work. The best builders never settle for close enough. The strongest and most enduring structures are those built with the best materials and the best eye for quality control. And that starts with the foundation. The writer of 1 Peter knows that, and that's the image he uses for our understanding of building a community of faith. The best foundations we can build in our lives and in our faith community start with the right building blocks. The author of 1 Peter calls Jesus our cornerstone. Cornerstones are often largely symbolic, But particularly, the ancient understanding of the cornerstone was that everything was built off of this stone. Remember that modern techniques of preparing bricks and stones were not exactly available then. So these stones were man-made, which always meant there was a possibility for human error. The cornerstone, though, had to be perfect. To say that Jesus is our cornerstone is to say that Jesus is the perfect building block from which all other things build up. If you've ever built a wall and realized that your initial corner wasn't exactly plumb, you'll know that by the end it causes a ripple effect of problems. You go to lay that last piece of sheetrock and it's 4 feet wide at the top and 3 feet wide at the bottom, and that doesn't work well. And think about that in terms of our faith journey. What exactly is your cornerstone? We can all choose different things for that to be, but let's say your cornerstone is your job. Well, anytime that livelihood is threatened, the whole wall, your whole life seems to feel the ripple effect. Let's say the cornerstone is your family. That sounds noble. And as foundational as your family needs to be in your life, let's say that something happens to one of them that causes the foundation to shift. Again, the whole wall, your whole life feels the ripple effect. Or let's say that you've made your church your cornerstone. That sounds like a good thing to do, doesn't it? But the reality is, when something shifts at church, your whole foundation is thrown off again. And let's say that your cornerstone is your health. The day you become sick or find out you have a chronic condition, the whole wall shifts again. You can begin thinking about what that cornerstone is in your life. Many, many good things can be the cornerstone of our lives, and sometimes some bad things can take that place too. But what I'm trying to say here is that no matter how good something appears to be as a cornerstone, it can never appropriately fill the place of Jesus. It's like putting a stone that has just a small defect or two, but is close enough, in place of your cornerstone. The passage points out that this cornerstone was rejected by some. It was seen as a rock to be cast aside. The reality was the cornerstone looked the same to those who were standing around. The difference was in how people saw the importance of that rock. As one commentator so aptly put it, 1 Peter 1 through 10, or 2, 1 through 10, reminds us that the difference between Christians and non-Christians is not that we see different things, but that we see the same things differently. One sees a rock to be cast aside, while another sees a cornerstone. One saw the stone as dead and useless, while God saw the stone as a living and valuable rock. We have to ask ourselves if we look to Christ as something to be set aside or the building block that takes a secondary role, or if we look to Christ as the cornerstone on which everything else is built. While Jesus has to be the building block of our spiritual lives, he also has to be the cornerstone of our church. Our current buildings have cornerstones to commemorate the years that they were built. And just like our building needs a strong cornerstone, our church needs a strong cornerstone. We need to make sure the strength of our faith is balanced firmly on Jesus Christ. As a church, just like as individuals, we may also have things we could place in place of Jesus as our cornerstone. The church building is one of them. And thankfully, I hope we've learned through this experience that 3028 Mountain Road can be our home base, but it is not our cornerstone. We are built on something much stronger than that. There are other things we might want to put as our cornerstone, but at the end of the day, the only solid foundation we have as a church is when we place Jesus at the very cornerstone of it. When we make sure Jesus is in that place, the scripture admonishes us, the rest of us, to be living stones built into a spiritual house. I can't think of a better image. When I look around the screen today and see all of your faces, I see all the building blocks of a strong church. Every single one of you is what makes Glen Allen Baptist Church a spiritual house. Together, we form a beautiful place of worship. And yes, all of our stones are just a little bit cracked and perhaps a little imperfect in places. That's what it means to be a building block that is not Jesus. But our cornerstone is set firmly in the right place, and we are able to be built into a beautiful house because Jesus is at its foundation. So from our computer screens to our pews, we are built into something that is holy and pleasing to God. The latter half of this passage explains why that is so important. We aren't being built up together into this beautiful edifice just so we can enjoy being together. We are being built into this new creation so that we might proclaim God's mighty acts. And in one of my very favorite parts of Scripture, 1 Peter says that we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We would miss the point here to think that God meant that relative to a particular nation state. It's not that America is or Israel was a holy nation. No, the call to be a chosen race, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation extends far beyond any nationalistic boundaries. The call to be set apart is the call of every Christian, of every race, of every tribe, and of every tongue. Together, we are set apart to be unique people. But we have a citizenship that rises above any other identity we could ever claim. This citizenry gives us a distinct identity. It is not one that makes us better than anyone else. Though unfortunately, Christianity has gotten a bad rap for touting itself as one who is superior. But to be built up as God's people and set apart is to be given an identity that is full of grace. Consequently, we have a responsibility to act differently in the world. When people look at us both as individuals and as a church body or larger, they should see that our cornerstone is oriented differently. They should see the building blocks of our faith that root us during every season of life. Can the world see how we handle diversity differently? Can they see how joy radiates from our lives even during dark times? Can they see evidence of hope in everything that we do? Can they see clear signs that we are people who walk in light as the scripture passage teaches? And we are called to make that light shine brightly so that others might see Jesus. Challenge before us today is to examine our cornerstone. Is it a half-inch off like our ramp was? Is it a little shaky and off-center? Is it built on something that isn't exactly enough? Or is it built firmly on Jesus Christ? Because if it's the latter, that results in stability and longevity of a building and also of our faith. And if we do have our cornerstone there, we put all of our building blocks together to show the world the power of God at work in the church, transforming and shaping lives into God's likeness. May it be so. Amen.